During his morning patrol in the harsh northern wilderness of the Arctic Reserve, the icy wind lifted the snow, making visibility poor. Jake followed the sound that led him to a natural ice bridge over a partially frozen river. There, he discovered a deep trap with an exhausted polar bear cub inside, already losing strength due to the cold and fatigue. Poachers had designed the trap with steep, smooth walls on purpose. Tool marks and fresh scratches showed the cub's desperate attempts to escape. The pit was quite deep, and its edges had been deliberately soaked with water, which froze quickly, creating a dangerously slippery surface. Jake noticed a few drops of blood on the ice. The cub had injured itself trying to climb out. Looking around, Jake spotted the cub's mother caught in a steel net set up by the poachers. Her paw was badly wounded by the metal cables, and each attempt to free herself only made the injury worse. She gazed helplessly in the direction of her struggling cub. The net was skillfully secured. The cables were firmly anchored to a massive block of ice, deeply frozen into the ground. Each movement the mother made tightened the cables further around her paw. The thermometer on Jake's watch showed an extremely low temperature. The cub was moving slower, and its whimpers were growing weaker. Quickly assessing the situation, Jake realized he needed to rescue the cub first, as its condition was critical. He grabbed climbing gear from his backpack, a sturdy rope capable of supporting significant weight, carabiners, and compact blocks to create a hoisting system. His hands began to go numb from the cold, even with heated gloves. With precision, Jake set up the system, securing one end of the rope to a large ice ledge. Time was against him. Every lost minute reduced the cub's chances of survival. His first attempt to throw a loop failed. The frozen rope didn't move, well in his stiff, cold-numbed hands. The cub weakly stirred as the loop brushed against its body. The second attempt also failed as the loop slid off the cub's snow-covered fur. Jake quickened his movements, realizing he had even less time. On the third try, he succeeded. The loop tightened securely around the cub. Lifting it required extreme care. Any sudden movement could injure it further. Jake slowly pulled the rope, trying to keep the cub away from the sharp ice edges. The high roar of snowmobiles grew louder. With one final pull, the cub reached the surface. Its body was covered in a layer of ice, and its breathing was irregular. Jake quickly examined it. Aside from several small cuts, there were no major injuries, but hypothermia was a real threat. Grabbing a special thermal blanket from his backpack, he carefully wrapped the cub. The small bear didn't resist. It seemed to understand the man was trying to help. Its eyes, half closed from exhaustion, showed trust. Hiding the cub behind a large snowbank, Jake turned back to the mother. The lock on the chain was more complicated than he had expected. The poachers had used a tamper-proof mechanism. Jake's fingers trembled from the cold as he pulled out a multi-tool. To his surprise, the bear remained calm, as if she sensed the man was trying to help. Her breath formed clouds in the freezing air, and her dark eyes watched his every move. Jake noticed that the blood on her paw had begun to freeze. The sound of snowmobiles grew closer. Now, Jake could distinguish voices. The poachers were talking among themselves, clearly pleased with the prospect of their capture. The ranger redoubled his efforts to unlock the padlock. The mechanism was complex. Any wrong move would increase the pressure on the bear's injured paw. Jake worked carefully, relying on his knowledge of such devices. His hands moved methodically despite the freezing cold and the growing tension. The first security layer was disabled after a few minutes. Jake heard a faint click inside the lock. One of the blocking mechanisms had been deactivated. Two more remained, and time was running out. Suddenly, the poachers appeared. 3 armed men emerged from the snowstorm. The leader, a tall man with a graying beard, was the first to notice the empty trap. His face twisted with rage as he spotted the tracks in the snow. The second poacher immediately scanned the area, searching for the culprit. Jake crouched behind the massive bear, trying to stay hidden. His fingers instinctively found the right mechanism. The second security layer was disabled. Only one remained, the most difficult one. One of the poachers noticed movement and raised his weapon. "Hey, someone's there!" he shouted, stepping forward. Jake knew time was up. His fingers found the final mechanism in the lock. A sudden gust of wind lifted a veil of snow, momentarily blinding the poachers. That brief instant was all he needed. The padlock finally gave way. The sound of the chain falling echoed in the frozen air. Sensing her freedom, the bear rose onto her hind legs. She stood like a snow-covered mountain. Her massive white body towered over the men, and her eyes burned with fury. The poachers froze in shock. Jake seized the moment and vanished into the blizzard. Behind him, the mother bear would use her sense of smell to find her cub. From a distance, Jake watched as she, after chasing off the poachers, found her little one. Carefully, she lifted the cub and carried it deeper into the reserve, toward safer winter grounds. The next 2 months were spent in a constant state of alert. Jake knew the poachers wouldn't forgive him for ruining their hunt. He began noticing strange snowmobile tracks in remote areas of the reserve, cigarette butts, and suspicious marks in the snow. He grabbed his camera to document the evidence. Then, a gunshot, a blank round. The poachers were trying to force him into a trap. Jake dodged, but 4 armed men had already surrounded him. Among them, he recognized the graying, bearded leader. "Want to play the hero, huh?" the leader mocked, signaling for his men to move in. His eyes were as cold as the ice around them. Jake tried to reach for his radio, but a hard blow to his back sent him to the ground. The poachers moved quickly and efficiently. This was clearly not their first time. Thick ropes dug painfully into the ranger's wrists. One of the criminals methodically searched his backpack, tossing all the equipment into the snow. The radio landed in a snowbank, followed by his phone. The leader pulled out a map and pointed to a location. "There," he ordered, shoving Jake forward. They walked for about an hour through the deep snow, heading into increasingly desolate territory. The biting cold grew more intense, making everything feel even more hopeless. That part of the reserve was rarely patrolled, and in this weather, there was no chance of help. The poachers had clearly chosen a place where no one would disturb them. Suddenly, one of the criminals stopped abruptly. His face paled. He had heard something through the howling blizzard. The others froze in place, straining to see through. The swirling snow, moving as if she had emerged from thin air, the bear advanced silently despite her massive size. Jake recognized her instantly by the scar on her paw. It was the same bear he had saved 2 months earlier. "Don't move," the leader whispered, slowly raising his weapon. But the bear had already positioned herself between the poachers and Jake, who was still bound. Her towering presence radiated a silent threat, and her eyes locked onto the armed men. The poachers began backing away slowly, never taking their eyes off the colossal predator. The snow crunched beneath their boots, each sound earning another. Low, warning growl from the bear. Her behavior was unusual. She wasn't attacking, but she also wasn't letting them get any closer to Jake. One of the poachers panicked and reached for his rifle. The bear's reaction was immediate. Her growl deepened, and her stance became even more menacing. She took a step forward, revealing her full height and power. That was the breaking point. The poachers' fear finally outweighed their thirst for revenge. "Let's get out of here," the leader shouted. The poachers fled, abandoning their equipment. The sound of their heavy footsteps in crunching snow slowly faded into the storm. The bear remained still, watching intently until the criminals disappeared. Her muscles stayed tense, ready to attack if any of them dared to return. Only when the last footsteps vanished into the wind did she turn to Jake. As she approached, though it was another attempt at a rescue, his heart pounded. A half-ton predator could end his life with a single swipe, yet her movements were surprisingly gentle. She stopped just a few steps away and sniffed the air. There was recognition in her eyes. She remembered the scent of the man who had saved her life and that of her cub. The bear tilted her massive head, her black nose almost touching the snow, as she sniffed the ropes binding Jake's wrists. but she seemed to be expecting this. Shielded by the blizzard, she cautiously moved closer to the bindings. Her warm breath melted the ice on Jake's frozen hands. To his astonishment, the bear began to gently gnaw at the ropes. Her enormous teeth, capable of tearing through a seal's thick hide, worked with incredible precision, avoiding even the slightest touch of Jake's skin. One by one, the knots loosened until he was completely free. After releasing him, the bear took a few steps back, but she didn't leave. She seemed to be waiting for him to get up and regain his composure. Jake slowly rose, stretching his stiff limbs. His wrists were red from the ropes, but thankfully, there were no serious injuries. "Thank you," he whispered, looking into the dark eyes of the animal. The bear tilted her head slightly, as if she understood the words. In that moment, an extraordinary bond was formed between man and beast. Two beings who had saved each other, now standing together in the vast Arctic wilderness. Jake knew he had witnessed something rare. A predator known for its ferocity had displayed not only an incredible memory, but also a sense of compassion. She hadn't just recognized him, she had repaid her debt by saving his life. After a few seconds, the bear turned and walked calmly into the depths of the snowy tundra. Her towering form vanished into the storm, leaving behind only footprints in the snow and an incredible story of mutual salvation. That encounter forever changed Jake's understanding of wild animals. He realized that even the most feared predators could be capable of gratitude and kindness. In the relentless conditions of the Arctic, where survival instincts rule, a remarkable bond between a human and a beast had become possible.